Hey everyone, this is Tim Ashe, President of the Vermont Senate, with the update on Vermont's response to the COVID-19 virus on Monday, March 23rd. I'm going to give a series of updates, probably take about 15 minutes tonight, and sign off until tomorrow. The first thing I want to acknowledge is that as we knew, this crisis was going to grow. And we are now up to 75 positive tests in Vermont, which is 26 more than just yesterday. And sadly, 3 more people have died who had coronavirus infection. So that brings the number of infected people who've died to 5. So obviously we have them and their families in our minds. And we know in the days ahead this is not going to get easier. It's going to get harder as the infection rate goes up. And we all have to brace ourselves for some difficult days ahead. One of the things that I've received a number of questions about have been the extent to which people who are working in the healthcare sector have personal protective equipment, shorthand is PPE. In a legislative leadership meeting that I just raced from to join this video feed, we learned that right now there are 82,000 surgical masks available in Vermont right now. They are being managed collectively through the Emergency Operations Center in partnership with various healthcare institutions. And then there's an additional kind of mask called an N95 mask. These are more protective than a typical surgical mask. There are now 78,000 of those in Vermont. That is up, we understand, from 74,000 yesterday because some from the federal stockpile came in. So that just gives you a sense on a day-to-day basis. We're doing everything we can to get as much of this equipment here into Vermont as possible, so just 4,000 added since yesterday. Of course, each day they're burning through more of these masks, and they're being the need is there to replace them. So all across the state, we're making sure that people have access. I asked the Commissioner of Public Safety whether anyone who had hoped to get additional N95 masks in whatever setting, whether that was in a hospital setting, community-based healthcare setting, or in some other service setting where individuals work or interact with vulnerable populations. As we understand it, no one has been denied masks, although they haven't all been delivered to those who have asked for it. So if anyone encounters a problem there, please let me know. I'd also like to mention that we asked the Commissioner very directly whether people who work in retail settings, especially grocery stores and markets, whether the employees there all have the kind of protective gear that they need. As we understand it, most supermarkets in particular buy boxes of gloves and they're giving them to their employees over and over again. So that we think that most workers are covered. But if you go to a facility and you see that there are people working and it does not appear that they have the right equipment to keep their hands protected or counters protected, it's important you let us know so we can make sure that the frontline workers who work in retail are as protected as the people who are being made vulnerable in other settings. A quick word, we also heard today from the president of Norwich College, the chancellor of the state college system, and the president of the University of Vermont. We wanted to understand how the crisis is impacting our higher education institutions. And it was a pretty sobering report from all 3 of the presidents. Needless to say, having to cancel school, cancel in-person collegiate schooling is very disruptive. Most of the institutions had essentially 1 week to plan. Fortunate for them, in some way, the students were largely on break. But to put it in perspective, Norwich College has indicated that to refund the remaining dormitory money to the students who are not still on campus is about a $5 million expense that they had not been budgeting for. The chancellor of the state college system said that system-wide refunds that they anticipate are in the $5 to $6 million range, and these are systems that don't have big surpluses. And so we can expect our institutions of higher education, which in most communities that they're in Vermont might be the most important anchor organization, to really be suffering financially when we get to the other side of this, whenever that is. In addition, and the president of UVM amplified comments by the previous two presidents, said that 6 of 8 of their major recruitment slash potential student events that they organize each year are canceled. The best way, frankly, for most Vermont institutions of higher education to get someone to attend a school here is to get them to come visit, because then they see what a wonderful state this is. For 6 of 8 of their events to be canceled means that all the institutions are worried about enrollment for next year. I mention this only because it goes to show just how far the reach of this crisis is, because of course saving lives and keeping people healthy is our first and foremost priority. Then there are all the issues about the rest of society and making sure that things can return as much to normal as possible. Those daily calls have been very important to keep people in the legislature, but also the public informed about what's going on in the key aspects of our state government. So at 4 o'clock every day those calls are available. Check my Facebook page or Twitter and you'll see how to access those meetings, and I think you'll find them very informative. Tomorrow we anticipate having the Commissioner of Tax on. Tax policy is something that some of us geeks often like talking about, not usually for the average person. However, right now everybody who's self-employed, an independent contractor, anybody who knows that their income is going down, businesses not knowing how they're going to pay their tax bills, suddenly tax policy is on the front of many people's minds. So we're going to have the Commissioner on. So in light of that, I want to say a few words about what the Tax Department indicated today. The Tax Department, as I had mentioned in previous updates, was preparing to provide new guidance on Friday, but the federal government made a shift in policy and changed tax day from April 15th to July 15th. Our tax code in Vermont is almost inextricably linked to the federal tax code, so the movement from April 15th to July 15th is a serious challenge. As a result, today the Vermont Tax Department has advised that the income tax filing due dates for the following taxes have been moved from April 15th to July 15th. Personal income tax, homestead declaration and property tax claims, corporate income tax, and fiduciary income tax. For most Vermonters, personal income tax and homestead declarations are the most important of that list. For those who file corporate income tax, obviously that's important to you. But the short story is that the normal tax filings for virtually all Vermonters have been moved, the deadline, from April 15th to July 15th. And that's not just the waiver of penalties and interest, but the actual filing of the form. What's important and wasn't really amplified in the message from the Tax Department is if you're expecting a refund, there's nothing stopping you from filing as soon as you'd like to and have the normal refund process. So you can get that moving. The Tax Department will send the refund check. That is not an issue. So just because you can file later doesn't mean you can't file now to get the refund that you want. One other important short-term policy that was adopted today by our Tax Department is something that the restaurant industry in Vermont has been speaking out in favor of. About 100+ restaurants came together with a set of recommendations, and one of the things they flagged was that they collect they collect meals tax, and we're hoping to be able to not have to remit the tax to the state that's coming up due in a couple weeks, because so many of them are struggling right now to pay the basic bills while they're under their shutdown order. So today, the Tax Department declared that the rooms and meals tax or sales and use tax will not have to be remitted indefinitely, which is to say the March 25 and April 25th deadlines for submitting those taxes to the state, the tax money that you've collected from your customers and you're obligated to send to the state, you can hold on to those dollars in the meantime. The state legislature and the governor have much work to do moving forward to determine how we're going to relieve pressure on business community while also having revenues coming in to support general state government. I've mentioned before we stand to have a massive revenue downgrade, not just for next year, but for just the remaining 3 months. Substantial reduction in revenues to the state. So the legislature and the governor both have to be very cautious before waiving any taxes. But in this case, what we've said is you do not have to send those dollars to the state at this time, and that will likely be extended at least some number of months into the future so that you have that cash on hand to do important things to preserve your business, because we know how stressed you are. But just to reiterate, I will I'll read it a little bit, that's why I'm looking off. The Commissioner of Taxes is exercising his authority to provide relief to Vermont businesses who owe meals and rooms tax or sales and use tax until further notice. So that means that you will not pay the March 25th or April 25th deadline taxes, which should be some relief. It's not all that the restaurant industry was asking for, but in the short term it does provide a little bit of cash relief. So tomorrow at 4, the Tax Commission will be hearing, the Joint Rules Committee will be hearing from the Tax Commissioner, and you can get more updates about what the department is thinking. One other important, I've talked a little bit in previous updates about the federal law. One item that we're still learning, I mean, it's not a simple piece of legislation from Congress, although that should not be surprising. One of the benefits they created was a paid sick leave program, and that paid sick leave program wasn't wide open in terms of eligibility. So I don't misstate. The people who are eligible for the paid sick leave program are people who are, 1, subject to federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order, 2, advised by a doctor to self-quarantine, 3, experiencing symptoms of COVID-19, 4, caring for an individual in a quarantined or isolation area, or 5, caring for a son or daughter if a school or daycare has been closed due to COVID-19 precautions, which might include many people in Vermont. Now, paid sick leave we conventionally think of as for people who are conventional employees, not people who are self-employed or sole proprietors. However, the Congressional Committee on Small Business, there is such a thing, on their fact sheet about the bill, and as we say, we're still learning about this, one of the questions is, are sole proprietors and self-employed workers, or those in the so-called gig economy, eligible for this tax credit? The tax credit is how the paid leave program is paid for. The answer is, according to the Committee on Small Business, which you helped write this, says, yes, the legislation ensures that self-employed and gig economy workers receive the credit. For the days they cannot work, they can claim a tax credit of up to $200 a day for up to 10 days, or their average daily self-employment income for up to 10 days, whichever is lower. So obviously this is more complicated than would be ideal, but what it says is that if you are a sole proprietor or self-employed and you fall into one of those categories, and as I say, for many Vermonters it's most likely that you're caring for a kid who has to be home because daycare or school has been closed, you are eligible for the paid sick leave program. And the way you would see the money back is it would be reduced from future quarterly tax payments that you would otherwise pay. So there'll be more to learn about this, and I have no claim of authority on the details of the federal legislation, but I do think that it's going to be particularly interesting or particularly helpful to learn more about how that federal law interacts with self-employed and sole proprietors here in Vermont. 10 days is not the length of time we're going to need for this, but I am pretty confident that there is going to be extensions of many of these programs that have just been created. Bear in mind, there are some in Congress who still believe this is going to be very short. It's not going to be very short. I do see one comment saying, oh my God, I'm so confused. I've probably helped cause that confusion, but let me say it one more time, perhaps a little slower, that we believe that sole proprietors and the self-employed, and that's the language used by Congress, I'm not sure how independent contractors fits in with that at the moment, are eligible for the federal paid sick leave program that was created last week if you fall into one of the categories of either being ordered to be home, caring for someone who's ordered to be home, or caring for a child who is at home because school or daycare has been closed. So we will learn more in the coming days. I wish that we had easier knowledge of just how all this works, but I do think it's important to let people know that that is going to be there. I'm going to close now with a bit of, I don't know if it's non-news or news, but the governor today said that it is likely that he will be ordering what has been described as a stay-at-home order in the next couple days. So that could be tomorrow, it could be the day after. I know many people have reached out to me urging me to tell the governor that we need to do a stay-at-home order immediately. Many of us in the legislature have encouraged the governor to take the most aggressive steps possible. And I'll just say two caveats. One, that many of the states that have stay-at-home orders have so many exemptions that you turn on the news and look at New York City and people are everywhere. So even though they're being told to stay home and not interact, it is not always working with human behavior. And much of what Vermont has already closed, and with all the remote working going on, in some ways we have inched towards a stay-at-home order without calling it that, while other states have a stay-at-home order, but they look a lot like we are. Nonetheless, the governor has indicated he is likely to issue the order. It's just a matter of when, and we should all anticipate that moment. We've already had a lot of hoarding at the stores. I hope the people who've hoarded don't do it again. I don't think they could have possibly used up all the toilet paper and red meat that they purchased. But hopefully people will take a deep breath when that order is issued and really settle into a new home-based schedule so that we can all benefit, because this is a time to think about the welfare of all the people around us and not just how it's going to affect us. The other thing is I've spoken with numerous organizations and businesses around the state who have said under a stay-at-home order, would their workers be allowed to continue to go to work? An example would be a homeless shelter. Obviously, a homeless shelter can't function without someone who's actually there providing the services to the clients who are at the facility. So right now there is a list of people who are considered so-called essential employees, and we are going to have to think about that list and expand it. People who are delivering needed supplies and goods are already on the list. People who work in healthcare, mental health, on the list. But there are many people who don't quite fit the tidy definitions that we have, but who obviously, without them, we would be up against it. There is one other wrinkle, is that we know that restaurants have been able to deliver meals, and increasingly people are taking them up on that to both help the businesses and for convenience. Grocery stores and pharmacies are increasingly allowing people to order things for delivery. At this point, I believe grocery stores would remain open, and that people would still be able to leave home for medical and grocery needs. So we will know more either by tomorrow or the day after. With every minute that passes, I think it's going to come up closer, and we're going to have to all take the information we get in terms of the stay-at-home order and then reflect on it and then decide if there are any adjustments that need to be made. For those of you who have really been urging an immediate stay-at-home order, I think that's in the offing within just a day or so. I'm going to close by saying tomorrow the Senate returns to Montpelier. It's not going to be the full Senate because we want people to be safe and have as much spacing as possible. We are likely going to have 16 members of the Senate, which is the bare number required to have action, to take a number of measures to help local government continue to operate in this crisis, to help health services be delivered more flexibly, and to make sure that businesses aren't penalized for having to lay people off during this crisis, and that employees get benefits quickly and more broadly as a result of this crisis. This is just the first in what will be a number of measures in the days ahead. So don't want anyone to think that after we leave tomorrow and the House does its action on Wednesday that that's the end. It's really just scraping the beginning of the challenge ahead of us. So I want to thank you. I know that of all the things that the state probably doesn't need right now, it's a snowstorm, but it looks like we're at least going to get a little one. So I hope that despite all the challenging times that we're all facing and the stress and anxiety, that people are able to take a deep breath and make sure that we keep making good decisions for ourselves and for the people around us. Feel free to keep sending in the questions. I know there have been a tremendous number of coming in. I'm doing my best to farm them out to others in the Senate to take action on them, getting the ones that need to go directly to the governor, and we'll keep at it. So I think if we keep banding together, we're going to get through this thing and get to the other side. Thanks, and see you tomorrow.